I want to know how you deal with FOMO because it's a version of loneliness. And I know that Gideon mentioned it a little bit ago, like helping to protect others from it. So, what are some of your thoughts about like what can we do to keep ourselves from engaging in that kind of like social envy?
Well, let me just say from the outset that this is just such an extraordinary time that we will remember for the rest of our lives. And, a lot of times in our regular lives, if we're struggling, we look around us and we think, gosh, everyone's got a perfect life. And I'm the only one who's struggling or having a hard time. But you can be relatively assured that in this moment, that just about everybody is struggling in some way. It may not be evident from their social media feeds. It may not be clear when you talk to them initially or on a Zoom call with a group, but everyone is trying to figure out how to make sense of this extraordinary moment where our lives have been turned upside down. With that in mind, let's keep in mind a few other things I think that could help us during this time. When we typically experience FOMO, when we're looking at other people's lives and think, gosh, they have it so much better than I do, or I wish I was doing what they were doing. What that usually points to is a hole in our own lives. And the question is, how do we fill that hole? How do we recognize and remember what we have that's valuable in our own lives? And I actually think that COVID-19 is giving us an unexpected opportunity to step back and to take stock of our lives and to actually double down on the relationships that we have with family and friends. Just because we can't see people does not mean that we can't build on our connection with them. And there's some simple ways that I think we can do that. Simply, for example, putting 10 to 15 minutes aside each day where we make it a point to reach out to people we love, to just ask them how they're doing, to check in with them. That seems like a small amount of time, but it can be extraordinarily powerful. Making sure, second, that we're focusing on the quality of time that we spend with other people, that we're putting away our devices and distractions when we're catching up with friends. That can really boost the quality of our interaction with them. And third, we can look for opportunities to serve others. And service isn't always going to a soup kitchen or volunteering at an organization. Service can be checking on a neighbor who might be struggling without groceries. It could be offering to virtually babysit for 5 or 10 minutes even for a friend who's got small kids, just so they can have a moment to sit down and to breathe. Service I mentioned in particular because one of the things I learned in writing this book on social connection and on loneliness was that service is one of the most powerful antidotes we have to help rebuild our connections with other people. So these are just a few small steps that we can take to remind ourselves of how rich the connections are that we already have in our life. And finally, I would just mention this: solitude is really important too. As much as I think we have become uncomfortable with being alone, there is actually a great value to spending some amount of time on a regular basis when we're just letting the noise around us settle, when we give ourselves a chance to reflect and to think. And that could be a few minutes we spend on our stoop, feeling the breeze against our face. That could be a few minutes that we spend remembering 3 things that we're grateful for. It could be some time that we spend in meditation or taking a walk through nature or in prayer. But it's that solitude that allows us to ground ourselves more deeply, to remember who we are and who we have around us. And that can be a powerful way of feeling more connected despite the physical distancing we're experiencing in COVID-19.
I really appreciate that because that takes us into, my question for you is going to be talking about like, how do you deal with loneliness? And what it sounds like there is you're saying, well, you can reframe that moment, that instead of feeling like instead of telling yourself you're lonely, you can acknowledge that feeling, but then you can look around you and maybe get outside your body or get outside your head and say, oh, but here's what's happening. Here's what is real, not just my perception of what is real in this moment.
Yeah, and it's certainly true that, look, we aren't able to enjoy the same kind of connections in the same way that we did before, but that does not mean that we have to let physical distancing become social distancing. We can still, thanks to technology, we can still stay in touch with people. We can even choose strategies, as we heard earlier today, about potting together or grouping together, quarantining together with others, after coming to an appropriate arrangement with them. So we can find ways to connect with other people. But what is interesting and I think so striking about this moment is that it's pulling back the curtain on a deeper well of loneliness that existed long before COVID-19 arrived on the scene. We know from studies that have been done on the subject of loneliness that over 20% of adults in America admit to struggling with loneliness. We know that in other countries like the UK and Australia, 25% of their adults are dealing with loneliness. And this is not just an issue for those who are older. But it turns out that young people, in fact, have some of the highest rates of loneliness, despite how connected they are in technology. The reason this matters so much is not just because loneliness is a bad feeling, but because when it is chronic, it actually induces a stress state in our body, which has spillover effects on our health. And that's why we see that loneliness is associated with an increased risk of heart disease and premature death, an increased risk of depression and anxiety and sleep disturbances. The good news is that building connection in our life does not have to require transforming our life entirely, quitting our job, moving somewhere else so we can be closer to our friends, although they might be the right thing for some people. But it is the small steps that we take to spend a little bit more time with people, to make that time count, to seek out opportunities to serve. It is in these small ways that we can do a lot to actually strengthen how connected we feel in our lives. And that can make all the difference to our health, to our performance, and to our fulfillment.